Every evening, at exactly 6 o'clock, an old man named Elias did something he had done for 11 straight years. He set 2 plates on the table, one for himself and one for his son who no longer lived under this roof, who hadn't, in fact, for over a decade, not for a visitor, not out of habit, for a reason he never explained to anyone. David had left this house at 22, the way most sons eventually do, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of simple ambition. The city was calling him with things this small town never could: opportunity, movement, a version of life that felt bigger than the 4 walls he grew up in. At first, he called every Sunday, right after lunch, the way his mother used to insist on before she passed. Elias would sit by the phone, waiting, the receiver in one hand, a cup of tea slowly going cold in the other. Over time, though, Sunday calls became whenever I get a chance calls, and whenever I get a chance slowly became less and less often. David always promised he'd visit soon, a long weekend, a holiday, some quiet stretch when work finally slowed down. He meant it every single time. Elias never pushed. He never guilted him over the phone, never said you never call anymore the way some fathers might. He just ended every conversation with the same 7 words: the table's always got room for you. David used to laugh it off gently, thinking it was just something father said, an old-fashioned phrase, sweet but symbolic, not something to be taken quite so literally. He had no idea his father meant it exactly as he said it, every single evening, without fail, rain or shine, birthday or ordinary Tuesday, whether David called that week or not, 2 plates, set at 6 o'clock, the way it had always been since the day David first left. Then came a particular October, the leaves changing color outside the kitchen window for the 11th time since David had left, when the Sunday calls became rarer still. Sometimes 2 weeks would pass, sometimes 3. Elias didn't complain, not even to himself. He simply adjusted, the way he had quietly adjusted to everything else about growing older alone. He kept setting 2 plates, exactly as before. Somewhere along the way, without ever quite noticing when it started, Elias began speaking to the empty seat across from him. Small things, ordinary things. He'd mention the weather. He'd mention a stubborn sparrow that kept returning to the same branch outside the window every morning, as if it too was waiting for something. He never said out loud that he missed his son. That felt like too much to put into words, even to an empty chair. Instead, he'd simply say things like, "The soup's good tonight. You would have liked it," and let that be enough. Meanwhile, David's life had only grown louder. A promotion came through, then talk of an overseas transfer, a real opportunity, the kind of career move he'd worked a decade toward. He told himself, as he always did, that he'd visit once things settled, once the transfer was finalized, once there was finally room to breathe. That settling never quite arrived. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, David's phone rang while he was still at his desk. The name on the screen wasn't saved in his contacts. It wasn't his father's number. It was a neighbor's voice on the other end, calm, careful, the way people speak when they're about to say something they wish they didn't have to. By the time David reached the house, it was already evening, the same hour it had always been, 6 o'clock, except now the light through the window felt different, heavier somehow. The neighbor met him at the door, a kind, older woman who'd lived 3 houses down for as long as David could remember. She told him gently that it had happened in his sleep, that there had been no pain, no long suffering. Small mercies, she called them, though David could barely hear the words over the sound of his own pulse. He walked through the house like a stranger walking through somebody else's memories. The hallway, the old photographs, his childhood room untouched, as if frozen the exact day he'd packed his last box and driven away. Then he stepped into the kitchen, and there it was, 2 plates, still set, from the night before, the last evening his father had eaten alone, still setting a place for a son who hadn't come. David sat down, slowly, across from that empty seat, the same seat that had once been his own all those years ago, and for the first time, sitting exactly where his father must have sat for 4,000 evenings, he finally understood. His father hadn't simply been hoping David might visit one day. He had been keeping a place for him every single night, whether David came or not. On the kitchen counter, David noticed a small notebook, its corners worn soft from years of handling. He opened it. Every page held a date, and beneath it, only a few lines, small, ordinary entries, written like letters that were never meant to be mailed. March 4th, fixed the fence today. Told him about it at dinner, even though he wasn't here to hear it. Some habits you keep because stopping would mean giving up on someone. November 19th, cold today. Made the soup he always liked as a boy. Ate it slowly, like he was sitting right across from me. David sat at that table for a long time, the notebook open in his hands. He didn't cry right away. He simply sat there, quietly, with 11 years of ordinary evenings he never knew he'd been part of. That evening, David didn't leave. He stood in the kitchen for a while, then opened the same cupboard his father had used for over 40 years and took down 2 plates. He set the table, 2 plates, exactly as it had always been. Then he sat down, not in his own old seat, but in his father's, and looked across at the chair that, for the first time in 11 years, was truly and simply empty. He didn't say anything out loud. There didn't seem to be anything left to say. He simply picked up the fork and began eating slowly, the way a man eats when he is for once in no hurry to be anywhere else.